Hello, and thank you for visiting. Today, we're going to talk about Yes. Yes is possibly my favorite band, certainly one of my favorites. It's a band that's been with me since my mid-teens, and I just really, really love this band. So, I had bought the big cube set that I talked about earlier, and I decided I wanted to provide a review of all the Yes albums in there, one by one. So I decided to go in order of how I discovered these albums, because I think it puts some perspective on my opinions, and it gives them a little more context than just music I listened to years ago. So, 1983, we're going to start with the first Yes album I heard, 90125. Now, when this came out, Prog was pretty much a dead form. King Crimson had been gone for years now, almost a decade. Although I guess Discipline had already come out, so maybe they were already out. They were on their comeback. But okay, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Love Beach. That was the end of that. Genesis was shifting rapidly from what we might call progressive rock band into almost a pure pop band. And most of the artists were kind of hiding out. Steve Howe, John Wetton, Carl Palmer, Jeff Downs, they were hiding out in an arena band called Asia, pretending to make commercial radio-friendly music. So that's kind of the context. It was a context I knew nothing about. I had never heard of Yes before this, although I'm sure I had seen some of those Roger Dean album covers flipping through the records at the store. But I cannot remember a single memory about Yes before Owner of a Lonely Heart. When I heard the song, I liked it. At the time, I didn't see it as much different than the other stuff I was listening to, Foreigner, Journey. I was really a big fan of The Police, and I think in retrospect, I had an affinity for bands that had good musicianship, and The Police have great musicianship, even though they played in a very minimalist way. So, Owner of a Lonely Heart I liked. I thought the video was cool. It was really dark, kind of gruesome. But see, I spent most of my life in choir in school, so singing was important to me. And also, I think maybe being in choir, I got kind of a sense of how songs are structured, and the layers and textures needed to make a song really, really sound good, at least to my ears. And I always had enjoyed classical music, even as a little child. I'm not going to sit here and say I was an expert by any means, but even at 8 or 9 years old, there were pieces of classical music I would listen to, and I'd be like, wow. But I liked, I went through Bee Gees and all the other pop music throughout the late 70s, early 80s too. So, anyways. So really, the song that sold me was the follow-up to Owner of a Lonely Heart, which was Leave It. Leave It, of course, is a song just kind of full of vocal layers. As a matter of fact, I think if somebody was in choir, Leave It was a song that would catch most people's attention from that aspect. So I said, I got to hear this album. Now, interestingly, I got this album and Genesis's self-titled album, the Shapes one, the same day. So it's just interesting that my introduction to prog rock kind of came through those two. And I'll get a little more into what I thought of the album, but let's talk a little bit about what shaped this album. Of course, why go through the whole long story that you, if you're watching this, have heard before. But Yes is broken up after 1980s Drama, actually surprisingly good album. Chris Squire and Alan White had made the song Run with the Fox, which kind of foreshadows some of the sound that you hear in 90125. And it's a sound that Chris Squire has always been kind of the pop end of Yes, even though his bass playing is not what you would call pop bass playing. And so we started kind of seeing that pop sensibility coming up and going for the one. And then in Tormato had quite a bit of that pop sensibility. So Run with the Fox really is just kind of a one-off radio-friendly hit. What happened with the band is, of course, we know that Trevor Rabin was brought in. Actually, that's not true. We know the story. He actually had written a bunch of songs. He met up with White and Squire, who had been trying to get something going with Jimmy Page, and that didn't work out. Eventually, Tony Kaye was brought on board, and then finally John Anderson came in, and of course became Yes. The approach to songwriting in 90125 is substantially different than what we're used to with an Yes album. Generally, if you look at any classic Yes album, and I'm going to be unfair and go with Close to the Edge. Close to the Edge, you don't listen to that song and say, oh, that's a guitar song or that's a keyboard song. Those elements are there and they have their little moments. But really you have, especially when Bill Bruford was drumming, you had the different artists taking up different sections of sonic space and then switching them around. It's a rather complex piece of music. But even they're more, I don't want to say Roundabout's a pop song, but it's certainly radio friendly. Fair? It's the same thing. There's the guitar's there, the keyboards and the organ, but Chris Squire's bass is also galloping through that thing, and you have Bruford's high-end drumming going on. So Yes's approach was not you didn't listen to their music and say, oh, that's guitar music or that's keyboard music. There seemed to be an effort to spread the music out among the 5 players. Also, if you look at the history of Yes, if you listen to Steve Howe's homebrew compilations, you get a sense of this. Each person would bring in snippets and ideas, and then everybody would work on them and form that into a song. 90125, just because of the way the band was put together, is Trevor Rabin having a bunch of songs already pretty much completed. If you listen to his 90124, a lot of these were pretty well finished songs. So he comes in and it's basically here's the songs. And obviously he worked with Squire and White a lot, and songs like It Can Happen are clearly very much a Chris Squire song. So they all get together, but it's kind of, oddly enough, it's a much more guitar-oriented album than any other previous Yes albums because of the way it was put together. Now that's not necessarily good or bad, it just changes the sound. Now Trevor Horn, who was with Yes briefly, of course, in the drama era, produced this, and I do think he did a spectacular job producing this album. It is just gorgeous sounding. But really, it's maybe just because, originally they were called Cinema, there was definitely an arena friendliness to this album that I'm not sure, I think it might be part of the reason it turns some Yes fans off. And you hear that with Vulnerable Lonely Heart a little bit, although that's a great song. It's a good pop song. The lyrics are tight. It's got a lot going for it. So as an arena song, it's a really good one. The rest of the album is generally pretty darn good. I'm not going to sit here and, I know a lot of people badmouth the whole Trevor Rabin era. Hold On is a good song. It's kind of a heavy drum rock song. It Can Happen actually sounds a lot like something Yes would have produced in Going for the One. Although once again, I think Trevor Horn's production really elevates a lot of these songs, because the one thing I don't like about Going for the One and especially Tormato is the production just seems really murky on those albums. Changes is very much a radio-friendly rock song. Again, as a choir boy, I listened to these and I really loved that the choruses had these real complex choral aspect to the chorus. So just going through these real quick. Cinema is actually a cinema song because it does not feature John Anderson. And it says live. I've never quite understood that. Cinema is an instrumental. It's very, very brief, but it sounds basically like a really good jam. And it's good. And it shows a certain energy that was kind of lacking. Going for the One, Tormato, those albums really lacked a lot of energy. This album seems to have that. Our Song is a fine song, but kind of on the forgettable side. City of Love is it's close to a guitar-heavy metal kind of song that you're ever going to get from Yes. I may take that back. Somebody may say, well, later on you say that about everything. And then we get Hearts, a song I never hear Yes fans talk about. Hearts really is at 7 minutes 43 seconds, a distillation of many of Yes's best qualities into one fairly tight song. And it's also the only one I could think of offhand where Tony Kaye gets to actually kind of flex his muscles a little bit. I'm not sure exactly what his contribution is to the entire album, but it does seem a little bit like, well, he was brought in late in the project, and you can feel it. I'm pretty sure Trevor Rabin does most of the keyboards on this album. Hearts really is good. I love that song, and I don't know why more fans don't enjoy it. And it's really John Anderson's, of all the songs on here, John Anderson's lyrics and vocals are that kind of utopian, positive feeling that we associate generally with Yes. So I love this album, and I still love it. And this is coming from somebody that this was my starting point. And I understand for some people this isn't a very good starting point. But you should, if you don't like 90125, I think you should at least appreciate this. It kept the band alive through the 80s. And it also introduced people like me who as a teenager was kind of tired of the 3-chord rock and roll going on, and certainly tired of what you might call the 80s new wave pop. Gave us a chance to hear something different and then say, well, let's explore this. And I did explore by eventually listening to every single Yes album ever made. So I still think it's a great album. I think it's a good Yes album that distills a lot of their best qualities into shorter song structures. Also, I would say Chris Squire does a lot of he's always done background singing, but his background singing on this seems just a little bit better. I think probably because before it became a true Yes album, he had a lot of vocal work to contribute. And John Anderson's voice sounds good. And Trevor Rabin has a fine voice. Pretty standard rock singer voice. But it's good. It's certainly enjoyable. And he brings, I think, vocally helps bring even more to the band. So where does that leave us with the bonus tracks on this on the 2003 release? There's a single remix of Leave It, which sounds almost exactly like the original. Make It Easy, which I think was on the Yes Years box set. It's an okay song. It's a Cinema song, though. And it kind of shows you that Cinema had a little harder edge than what we would expect from Yes. But it's not bad. It's not a bad song, but it certainly doesn't fit on 90125 with the addition of John Anderson. It Can Happen, the Cinema version. This is the one I really like because it's a very complete piece of music. So you get to hear how It Can Happen evolved from a Cinema song to a Yes song by listening to this and then the original version on 90125. I rather like it. Chris Squire is on lead vocal on this one. And yeah, I enjoy it. It's actually the version they played in concert was a little more similar to this version. It's Over is, I hadn't heard that one until I got the remastered CD, is a straight up rock song. It has a riff in it that you would almost expect. If it was a little bit louder, it could have been a Black Sabbath song. Really. It's Trevor Rabin singing, and it really is very much what I think Cinema would have sounded like. There's a remix of Owner of a Lonely Heart on here that's terrible. Absolutely terrible. All these other bonus tracks, you know, that and the Leave It one, but this one especially, all the other bonus tracks on here serve some purpose. If you don't like the album, fine. But this does help you give you some context to where they were going. The Owner of a Lonely Heart remix is just pointless. And why they didn't put instead the Leave It remix, the Hello Goodbye mix, which is kind of silly, but I really enjoy it. You kind of get this not industrial beat, but kind of a mechanical beat, and it's not bad. And then finally the a cappella version of Leave It, which is really just all the instruments mixed out. I had that on a single, like a B-side somewhere. I don't remember what. That was pretty darn good. I actually enjoy the a cappella version. So there you have it. I'm going to say it's a good album. It's worth checking out. try to put your prejudices aside if possible and give it a listen. A little too much arena rock at times, but less than Asia. So that's it. I'll be back with the next one, which I think is going to be Fragile.